those are the sort of questions that I think we have to look at very carefully, because at the moment, all the talk yet again, for I think the 12th time now, is, oh, a deal's around the corner. Well, what deal? And, is really Trump ready to say, yes, I accept, Hormuz under the control of Iran, and Iran will charge certain types of fees for passage through sort of the Hormuz? Is that really the case? Because that's a huge thing. It would change the geopolitical complexion of the Middle East, because, the Gulf states eventually would have to come to terms with reality. And that reality, this is the reality. And increasingly, Iran is fixing that reality on the ground in Hormuz and making it work. The administration has been set up, the law's been setting up. And so the Gulf states and many states, European states, will all have to start rethinking their relationship with Iran. I mean, this is Iran's huge leverage, plus the fact that they, sit adjacent to American bases on their doorstep and to infrastructure on their doorstep. So escalatory, if you like, deterrence is quite possible. So they have control of Hormuz, and they have escalatory possibilities in the Gulf of striking targets which are more costly to the United States' interests than the damage that is being inflicted on Iran. These are difficult questions to sort of get to the bottom of, what is exactly that sort of balance and where it is. But then you come back to the final thing, which is Palestine and Lebanon, and Iran saying, no, you have to stop the attacks on Palestinians and Lebanese. It's just got to stop. But that isn't going to, of course, satisfy the Israeli demand for permanent security in their understanding of what I've just described to you, what that means. So it's it seems to me, we're moving in another direction, that Iran is moving towards escalatory deterrence. Now, will America react by military means? I think actually no, because I think they've discovered that they don't have the means to do anything. I mean, yes, they can do like Israel is doing, is bombing, Dahir, bomb Tehran in the same way, kill civilians, knock down civilian apartment blocks. But this is a war crime. And I think that matters a lot more in America than it matters in Israel. And so I'm not sure that this is going to get support, so much support in the Pentagon. So, I mean, Trump seems to me to be trapped in this. He wants something that can appear to be a win for him personally, big success, which is why I think, he talks so much about, getting back to uranium, although he's now said he doesn't care about uranium after all, after making it the central thing. He says, well, no, it is buried, it's entombed, it's finished. Well, okay, then just leave, go. If there's no nuclear threat, what are you staying for? Why would you, what will be the purpose of an attack? And what would it aim to achieve? I think those are the questions that would have to be asked, will be asked, certainly in the Pentagon. What are we trying to do here, Mr. President, if you say, the nuclear thing doesn't matter anymore because you finished it, that even the enriched uranium doesn't matter. What are we trying to do? So my final point is I just cannot see Iran going back into sort of a long negotiations of the JCPOA agreement. So I think the effectively the other pillar to the sort of change of policy is to sort of give up on negotiations and to say, that whole idea of going down to a negotiated nuclear settlement is just not possible, because it's not just a nuclear deal that you say, oh, well, we'll do this or we do this. You know as well as I. The Israelis will insist, that there have to be, unprepared visits. They have to take place whenever they choose. Most of the inspectors will belong to Mossad and the CIA, and that they will go in everywhere they can. And what they will also do is identify all of Iran's scientists and technical experts, just as they did in the previous one, of insisting to interview the people who are working on Iranian nuclear project, all of whom have been subsequently, by coincidence, assassinated. So, I mean, I find it quite difficult to see how Iran would go back down that route.
Alastair, when it comes to Israel, I think two problems right now for Israel. One of them is the use of drones and rockets right now. And as you've mentioned, they're taking casualties because of these drones. They cannot control it. As you've seen with the Israeli ambassador to the UN, he said how effectively Hezbollah is using these drones to hit in the targets. Iron Dome batteries, communication systems, gathering of soldiers, they are attacking everything in the southern part of Lebanon. And the rockets are going to the northern part of Israel. This is the reality, the new reality of Israel. That's why they need to escalate it to, as you mentioned, to Dahia doctrine, to destroy everything, because you are not able to defeat Hamas in the southern part of Lebanon. You have to do something else. You have to escalate the situation. And the other point on the part of Israelis, they don't want the United States to leave the region. They want the United States to stay in the region, because those bases were destroyed by the United States, can stay in the region with this sort of conflict, with this sort of some sort of blockade that is going on right now. This is a conflict. It's not a war of attrition. It's a conflict of attrition between Iran and the United States. And the other point when it comes to the United States is that we see that they have the shortage when it comes to the stockpile. The meeting Donald Trump had with Xi about rare earth minerals didn't go well. That's why we've seen Rubio going to Armenia, making new deal with the minerals, because they want to replace those weapons, those missiles, interceptors that were used during the war. And how Donald Trump, as you mentioned, is a trap for Donald Trump. But how do you see all these vectors coming together and some sort of calculation happening on the part of the Trump administration? What is the off-ramp for Donald Trump? If there is no deal, you mentioned the most important point here is that there is no real negotiations happening between the two sides. Nothing is happening.
I don't see an off-ramp. I don't think there is one. Nothing that would give him, something to boast about as a big victory for himself and for America. And what you said, I would endorse, because, what is equally happening, which is extraordinary, is that Israel has made Netanyahu's made a big play that, yes, maybe we can do without the $3.5 billion annual subsidies that we get from the United States. Well, actually, passing through Congress is a bill to merge the Israeli and American militaries completely, fuse them together in data sharing, AI sharing, technology sharing, research and development, missile technology, building of missiles. I mean, a complete fusion of the two, so that Israel and America would be interchangeable in the same. I mean, if you were in business, you'd say, really, this is a reverse takeover bid. The Israelis are bidding to take over the United States because the military is, a crucial institution, and crucial also because it generates so much money. I mean, the budget for the military is huge, and portions of it spread around states and politicians and other people, so that it is, the military structure is really almost. I mean, this is the business model of America, is the military industrial state. And so, the consequences of this will be huge if it continues. I mean, at the moment, it's just been I think the committee have just passed it and agreed it should go to the next stage. Of course, it's not over yet, but I mean, these are extraordinary things that seem to be taking place in the US, which will effectively change the whole question of sovereignty, American sovereignty. So yes, I mean, this is and are all of these things connected? This is a big question. So is it possible, therefore, in these sort of circumstances, for Iran or for Trump to find his off ramp, or Iran to even think seriously, contemplate seriously that some deal is possible, that there is a deal that could be had beyond, there could be one where, simply both sides say, okay, you go on with Hormuz as you choose, and Hezbollah will do what it wants, and a sort of laissez-faire, let everything be, and we'll just pretend we haven't noticed. I mean, that sort of outcome, I think, is quite likely. But actually, I'm not even sure we'll get there, because I think the next thing which will change the whole pattern of this is when the West falls over the economic cliff, and it's likely to start falling off the cliff this month. No one knows exactly when, but could be longer. But mid-June, we may start to see real effects of Hormuz on the European economies, especially.
I think that's the point right now for the Trump administration. If they continue with the conflict in the Strait of Hormuz, how is that going to influence the U.S. economy? Because the U.S. economy is totally connected with the global economies, part of the global economy, big chunk of the global economy. And Donald Trump has used the oil reserves of the United States to balance the market. So how long can he continue with this same sort of attitude to balance that? And is that going to be sustainable for Donald Trump?
No, inventories are at bottom. They bottomed out. I mean, even the strategic reserve in America is completely running on empty. It's like if you have an oil tank at your home, you don't take the last 10 centimeters of it because it's sludge, and so the strategic reserve is basically down to sludge at the moment. So they can't take more out, and the inventories in Europe are in dire straits. People are pretending and extending that everything is fine, nothing is really changing. It's about to change, and so what will happen? Will that prompt Trump just simply to capitulate. It's not in his character. I mean, he's never done that. Trump is increasingly in a strange medical mental condition, and this seems more likely that he will do something unpredicted, unpredictable, and maybe very stupid in this time, because it's undoubtedly he's under huge stress because of these things, and his reasoning is not really there.
Do you think that this move on the part of Senate and Congress, that somehow they're limiting Donald Trump's, sort of power when it comes to the war with Iran? They're trying to. Is that going to help Donald Trump to give him some sort of off-ramp, political off-ramp? When the Congress is asking for that, the Senate is asking for that, I have to follow them. And is that going to help him?
No, he's not saying that. He's saying the opposite. He's saying they're traitors. He's saying the 4 Republicans that voted with the Democrats are traitors. So he's certainly not saying, oh, well, this is a message to me and I ought to take it seriously. No, he's saying, those people were traitors. So I don't think there's, that's not his character. Again, he will go at it and he will blame, everyone is to blame, but not him. He will blame someone. Might be Hegseth or someone else, or it was Massey or whoever it will be, but someone will no doubt be blamed for the situation. So I don't think that will be the way out. I don't really see a way out, and he seems to have dismissed. Or in the words that the New York Times uses, not heeded the warnings about the economic consequences. And, not on just oil and gas. I mean, oil isn't a single substance. There's light oil, there's heavy oil, and, you can't make diesel from light oil, and heavy oil does certain things. And also there are all the other elements that pass through Hormuz that are critical to supply lines. Technical things, helium and fertilizers and things. Fertilizer prices is shooting up in Europe. This is the planting season. At the moment, you can still get things, but, in a month or two, it may be very different. I mean, it is a very serious situation that is growing. And is he capable of, just turning around to Kalibaf and saying, let's just call it quits and let's get out of this. Finish. No deal. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that could be the point. That would be the point. At least on the part of Iranians, they don't see any sort of. That's why Ghalibaf, he came out, said everything is decided on the battlefield, is not by negotiations, because there is no negotiations happening. And whoever comes out with some sort of deal or agreement, the one wins who is prepared for the day after any sort of deal. This is prepared to fight back, to fight on the battlefield. This is the mindset on the part of Iran. I have never heard such a thing from Iranians. You may remember something from IRGC, but none of these, the head of Iranian parliament, that was the head of Iranian delegation, talking this way is a huge strategic change, in my opinion, on the part of Iranians.
This is what I just wrote about, was to say, we are in a new phase. And this is the phase which is escalatory deterrence, principally, as a pressure point, waiting for Europe and the West to fall off their economic cliff. And then we have to see what happens. But at that point, there's does the United States sort of say, okay, let's call it quits, let's fold this whole thing up and go? I don't know. Or something else happened in America. It's in a very sort of there's huge instability, I think, in the West at this point, because whole layers of ideas and doctrines and things are suddenly being exposed as hollow and empty, and they've got nothing really to replace them. So whole strategic views and horizons are suddenly collapsing, and Brussels has no idea what to do now and thrashes around, and they face other problems, because we didn't touch on it, but when I mentioned about Russia and its nuclear weapons, Russia is changing its position to something closer to the Iranian position, in terms of saying we need to have escalatory deterrence against Europe. So, the whole European project, which was to sort of, to implode Russia by pressure, and particularly by the sort of drawing America back into Europe so that they can threaten America, war with Russia. I mean, Europe isn't capable of doing war with Russia as it stands, and now they've lost, at least Trump's America. Maybe they hope that, the new administration, whatever it is, or whoever it is, would bring America back to NATO, back to Europe, and there could be the familiar love-in between the Brussels elites and the new elites emerging in Washington. I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen at all. I think there's going to be a tough reaction against the establishment in many of these countries.
Alastair, just before wrapping up, you mentioned that Russia is reassessing its strategy. Does it mean that they're gonna, if Europe decides to escalate the war, are they gonna, with these drones, we know that how they're using these drones to hit the targets deep inside Russia. Is that gonna change the Russian strategy to hit some American bases in Latvia and these countries?
Oh, well, I don't know what the targets will be, but that is precisely the strategy. They have been struck, by the way. Iran has, if you like, targeted some from their targets, a vulnerable target for their adversaries, struck it, and the United States withdrew from that as a consequence. It pulled back. So the methodology of a conventional missile strike on some European, it's not the Baltics, because the Baltic, I mean, they're not decision makers. Russia says very clearly, we are now going after the decision makers. The Baltics, snappy dogs at the tugging at Brussels, but the decision makers, which is Britain, France, and Germany, mainly in terms of, the drone and missile attacks deep, and Russia is saying, we've had enough. This is the last straw, particularly after the killing of all those children at the dormitory by drones, mostly young girls, teenage girls. I mean, that has outraged Russians, and they've said, we can't go on. I mean, the Europeans have, we are going to send a message to Europe, and if the only way to send it is by sending a missile into, and that's why Russia actually announced and provided details of all the sites in Europe that are providing missile assistance to Ukraine. It said, here they are, this is their location, this is where they sit geographically. That wasn't an accident.